Okay, so we've finished 2 turns. We're just about to start the 19th of September turn in 1940. The main things that have happened is I've conducted a withdrawal down the coastal road towards Mercer Matru. I've made a few adjustments to the defense of Mercer Matru in order to have a few more units defending the outer perimeter. I've started shuttling a few supplies out of Alexandria and railroading stuff up to Mercer Matru. And that the one unit in the Delta, well, the 2 units in the Delta I could move, I have moved. So this is the 16th Infantry Brigade and the Long Range Desert Group. So they're going to be moving up to help me hold Mercer Matru and potentially set up for the next stage. At this point in time, I think that I'm basically done with the Sidi Barani area. The units there are mostly just to annoy my opponent rather than to try to actually put up any real resistance. If there's any issues, I'm going to fall back. My next focus will be to try to secure this area. So this area is very important because it's historically where Operation Compass was launched from. So this is the inland road, which I can use to trace supply back to the railway at Mercer Matru, but which my opponent will not be able to because the Italians, until 1941, are limited to using primary roads only, while I can use secondary roads. Combat-wise, the only genuine combat that's happened is a couple of air units. So my fighters have been buzzing around his Libyan airfields, causing no loss to anyone. Though my bombers up here did manage to secure a nice little hit, and they took a step off his bombers on an air raid on his unprotected airbase up here. So he's now moved his fighters back to stop me from just doing that over and over again. But it was fun while it lasted. Continuing on, I think it's probably worth discussing supply in OCS. So OCS differentiates itself from other wargame systems by emphasizing there are 2 types of supply in OCS. The first thing is called trace supply. So trace supply is something you need to keep your troops alive. And that means that you need to be able to trace back to supply source. In this game, the ultimate supply sources for the Allies are Alexandria and the Suez Canal ports. So Suez and Port Said. The Allies are allowed to trace back using railroads, primary roads, and just general roads. And you have to be within 5 truck movement points of a detrainable hex, which is a point of interest, such as this, I guess, village, I suppose, or any town, any airfield is a detrainable hex. And this all matters because it stops you from just dumping supply in the middle of dumping supply slash troops in the middle of nowhere, and everything is going to be fine. The Italians have to trace back to Tripoli. Length of the trace doesn't matter as long as you're tracing back to a detrainable hex. This is something that will affect my opponent, Tekopo, out here, because the Italians, as mentioned before, can only trace using major road. This road is currently still a secondary road, and it doesn't become a major road until the 1st of December. And therefore it means that he can only trace supply back to Sollum. The solution to this problem is to have these units called HQs. So this is my Western Desert Force HQ. It has 2 numbers, a range, and a movement allowance. So this HQ can throw 8 movement points away from where it currently is. So you can do a limited form of what's called leapfrogging, where the HQ draws from a supply source and then throws it 8 movement points further. So he's got an HQ that, well, it's somewhere. Technically, you should not be allowed to look at these, but this is not going to matter much because we're all we're not really doing combat. But if there's an HQ around here, it can throw all the way up to around City Barani. The other type of supply in OCS is combat supply. So in OCS, you have these counters that represent supply stockpiles. They represent a mix of fuel and ammo. To do anything in this game other than using regular foot infantry costs supply. To move, for example, tanks, I will need to pay a supply. 1T of supply. If I want to bombard my opponent's units, I will need to spend supply. If I want to attack or defend, I will need to spend supply. And that supply drain will pose a natural limitation on operations. You only get a small amount of supply a turn, so currently I'm getting about 3T versus supply per turn. But any sort of combat will cost me 2 or 3T versus supply. So you can see how if I were to get engaged into a major fight, my supplies will drain up very, very, very quickly. So what's next? So as I mentioned before, the major point of interest for me now is this particular area near City Barani. This inland road gives me a good opportunity to outflank my opponent because, as I said previously, he's stuck along basically the coastal road to Sollum, from Sollum, as he can't trace supply down these roads. He's currently probably has an HQ somewhere over here that's throwing supply up to the El Hamra area. That's keeping him in supply, but I suspect he won't be able to put any sort of force here until we take City Barani itself. Now, this area is important because if I can get rid of this roadblock, I can outflank him to the north and come back around him and take Sollum, but also allows me to threaten using these various little coastal tracks to cut the road at multiple points. Because the desert is so big, it's unlikely that he'll be able to garrison all these spots with good strong units, and I should be able to find a gap, find a weak point, smash through, and cut him off at the coastal road. So that's the plan when I have to go on the offensive. This is all very, very premature talk because looking at the reinforcements, I basically am only getting a very small trickle of units, mix of some New Zealanders, some Indian units, more units from the 7th Armoured, more British regulars, and some more Australians, and I only really get enough of a force to start considering making a big push towards the end of November, where I start getting some more planes, where I start getting some more supply trucks, and hopefully by that sort of time, I should be able to amass enough of a force to launch an offensive. So that's historically Operation Compass was launched on the 12th of December. It was a stunning success. A very small British force, so about 3 or 4 divisions worth, managed to cut off a much larger Italian army along the Libya-Egyptian border, and the Allies managed to drive all the way to El Agila, and that was what caused Hitler to panic and send Rommel and the German Afrika Korps to drive the British back. So I guess tune in next time to see if it's likely that we will be covering significantly more turns next video, but I'll keep you informed.